should be here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'll do the roll call for the city council members. We have one member who is not going to attend. She was going to try to Zoom in, but that's not going to work for her. And so Hawkins Manuelian is not here. Mr. DeGolia? Here.
Yep.
Mr. Widmer? Vice Mayor Holland? And Mayor Lewis, I'm here. So now's the time for any public comments. It's to be noted that public comments are limited to items in a special meeting to what's on the agenda. There's only one item on the agenda, so you might want to hold your public comments until that is read. Otherwise, you're welcome to do so now.
And there are none online.
You have one online?
No, none online.
Oh, none online. Okay, great. Let's see. So is there any, just want to make a point at part of the agenda packet on page 3 of the agenda packet is the rules of decorum. So I just want to make sure that everybody reads that, and it's put on our agenda just to kind of set the tone of how we like to conduct our meetings. So the special meeting items is item number 1. It's a study session on the proposed inclusionary housing ordinance and implementation. We have a report from our town planner, Brittany Bendix. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, before you get started though, just a reminder, these mics do need to be turned on. So when you are speaking, make sure the red light's on.
The green.
Green light, sorry.
The green
colorblind
light.
Here, so.
I know. I'll take care of you.
I apparently turned mine on in anticipation and then off when I went to start speaking. So Town Planner Brittany Bendix, I am here today to give presentation on some initial analysis that we have on a potential inclusionary housing ordinance for the town. This would be based on our housing element. I am joined today by 2 colleagues online, Asher Cohn, who you've seen before on the housing element and with M Group, and then Stephanie Hoger, who I believe is a new face for you. She's with BAE, who did the analysis that we're looking through today. So with that, I'll go ahead and begin my presentation. Next slide. So brief agenda. The overall presentation is about 23 slides. Not all of that is content based. We will go over the purpose of the meeting, then cover some of the background information that I shared in the staff report. We'll then look at the analysis that was provided by BAE. Then I have queued up some specific discussion questions for this body that I think will help inform staff with how to proceed with this information. And then finally, just a brief summary of next steps. Next slide. So our purpose today is really to discuss and consider the recommendations for the town's inclusionary housing program. You have recommendations specifically from BAE's study, and then I've added additional thoughts that are tailored more specifically to the town and the process that we're in relative to the housing element certification to give you some context there, and then to provide feedback for staff, as I mentioned earlier, on how to proceed. Next slide. Next slide. So starting with some background, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same understanding of what an inclusionary housing program is. This is a local policy. It's optional. It's not required by the state, and it would require developers to set aside a portion of new housing or housing in mixed use developments at a certain affordability level that meets the goals of the local jurisdictions, RHNA or AFFH strategies. So that's something kind of broad to keep in mind. Next slide. Where does state law come into play? State law, although it doesn't require an inclusionary housing program, it does provide a framework for how cities or counties can go about adopting one. That includes public notification requirements, identifies when a nexus study is required and when it's not. Specifically, that would be related to programs that are with fees. How Fees are collected in the overall administration of a program, and then the ongoing performance monitoring of a program, specifying how frequently, for example, you would need to revisit a Nexus study. And there's some more information provided in the staff report, as well as BAE studies on specific laws. The law that I want to highlight here on this slide, as we have an overview, is the State Density Bonus Program, mainly for two reasons. One is that based on what a local jurisdiction sets as their inclusionary housing policy, a project could be automatically eligible for the State Density Bonus Program. And we've talked about that lightly through the housing element process, but also making sure that it's understood that with or without an inclusionary housing program, a developer can choose to participate in the State Density Bonus Program. So while it can make a project eligible to have a program, it doesn't mean that a project has to use the state's program. Next slide.
Wait, can I just ask a question about that?
Sure.
So.
Rick, would you turn on your mic, please?
If we set an inclusionary housing amount that it requires a certain percent of the housing that's built to be within a defined affordable range, then the if that amount is above a certain percentage, is that correct? Then the density bonus program applies. And is it also correct that, but notwithstanding whether you have that inclusionary program or not, if a developer chooses to build an amount of affordable housing above that state level of percentage of affordable housing, then they are eligible for the density bonus?
I think it's easier to look at it from a project is eligible to use the State Density Bonus Program if they have 5 or more units. Then when they enter that program, depending on what affordability levels they're providing and what the percentage of their project is affordable, that's going to dictate what their pro forma or their program for their development is. The issue with the local inclusionary housing program is that it can be set up in a way that automatically makes a project eligible for specific standards of the state density bonus program.
But the state density bonus is going to apply whether you have a local program
Yes.
or not.
Yes.
And it's really independent of the local program. It's just that if the local program sets a threshold, then it might automatically, if someone complies.
Correct. So then
included.
another way to look at that is if a local jurisdiction sets their own program, in some way they're ensuring that that project is fulfilling a specific need identified by that jurisdiction.
Can I
Sure.
follow up? Just about the affordability, and that those numbers are characterized by the state of the adjusted medium income kind of a thing?
Yeah, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in another slide. It's actually a combination of data gathered by the census, then interpreted by the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, and then again applied at the state, and then again at the regional level. So it kind of goes through every scale of development.
But it comes back down to the environment, the geographic area that we're talking about.
Yes.
It's not all of San Mateo County. It gets winnowed down to like Atherton and Menlo Park or something.
When we talk about meeting the needs of households at specific income levels
Mhm.
relative to AMI or average median income,
Mhm.
we're looking at San Mateo County information. We don't get as
Whole
specific
county.
and
The whole county.
fine-grained
Okay. that's
as
just
a
what I was-
town's boundary or a census tract. However, when we're doing the analyses, when BAE is doing the analyses, they have the ability to look at that finer level.
Mhm.
And that gets into the feasibility analysis and the in lieu fee analysis that we're going to talk about.
Okay. Right. Anyone else? Now that we're open for questions. Thanks, Brittany, for letting us do that.
Well, so then the next slide then is kind of transitioning into making this more local. Sorry, go back one slide, Anthony. I didn't capture everything on the housing element. The purpose of this slide is to, transition the topic to looking locally at Atherton. Where are we in the housing element? The council adopted updates on October 16th. We submitted that to the state. We did just get feedback from the state on December 30th. I summarized that in the staff report. By and large, there are no identified issues with the town's RENA or AFFH programs. So staff feels comfortable moving this conversation forward because we're not anticipating any corrective actions relative to rezoning new or other sites or changing the density or the zoning standards that have already been adopted and discussed. So at this point, we can now, there are technical issues that we need to address for analysis or document. Most of this is just documentation in the housing element. And we can focus on the inclusionary housing program. Next slide.
Just wait before we leave
Sure.
that issue, which is obviously a hot issue.
Yeah.
Can you just very quickly give a summary of what your generally expected time frame is?
Absolutely. So I am aiming for a special meeting with the Planning Commission on January 29th. Yes, thank you. January 29th. The new notice requirements did not give us enough time to hit January 22nd, which is the regular meeting. So we need a special meeting on the 29th. And anticipating that will move quickly. We'll then go to the next council meeting in February. And I'm anticipating we do have to make changes to the zoning ordinance. It's a very minor change to make sure that it's clear that by right, permitted by right means ministerially approved. The state asks us to clarify that, but that does mean the succession hearings for an ordinance, right? Introduction, first reading, second reading. So it could be 2 to 3 hearings depending on how we package that.
Your expectation is that following the February meeting, we'd be refiling.
Probably the March meeting.
After adoption.
Yeah, because we have to have, if we go to Planning Commission at the end of January and we hit the city council meeting and at their regular meeting in February, and then we go to the next regular meeting in March, that would be the fastest that we could get approval and turn it around and send it back to the
That's
state.
exactly what I asked.
Is that considering a resubmittal or an update? What do they call it, a resubmittal?
They're the same thing.
Okay.
I have a question. Do you think it'll help our chances with HCD if that we're moving forward with this while we're also doing another?
Yes, it doesn't hurt. Well, it also though depends on how you move forward. I will say that if you come out of this discussion or like, no, we're not doing anything, maybe hold that
Got it.
direction. But as long as there's some, HCD is already aware that this has been moving forward and then it was tiered to come after. I think based on the volume of information that you had on the housing element, as well as in the CEQA document, adding this seemed like a lot to add. And their understanding of that, and they realize that it's okay to separate these things out.
For
So,
the record, Commissioner
Yes.
Pinelli is here now.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Aaron, do you want to make a comment?
No, I just want to make sure that he was recognized.
All right, Brittany, I think you can proceed.
let me just.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So looking at the housing element. Looking at the housing element and specifically what it said relative to inclusionary housing. There are a couple key phrases that I drew your attention to in the staff report and I'll highlight here for the purpose of this discussion. First is how it characterized multifamily. It was general. It didn't specify if a program would include RM10 or be specific just to RM20 and 40. It was somewhat vague relative to new single-family housing because it didn't necessarily discern, are you talking about single-family homes that are a result of demolition and new construction? Or are you just looking at single-family homes that are developed on previously undeveloped lots? And then it also considered additions, which I flagged because that wasn't necessarily a piece of the analysis that was covered by BAE. The second program I wanted to highlight actually captures a percentage number and an affordability target. It used 20%. So that would mean that if a developer was proposing 100 units, 20 would have to meet the inclusionary requirement. Then what does that mean by the inclusionary requirement? You're looking at lower income households, and that establishes kind of the category of income levels that you're trying to target. That was specific to RM 20 and 40, so there's some flexibility here. And that gets to my final point on this slide, that the town's final and adopted inclusionary housing ordinance does not have to meet the housing element exactly. These are programs that are identified to give some guidance to the analysis that's required to even start moving and consider that. So that's why there's a little bit of discrepancy between what's actually in the adopted program and what BAE was looking at, because the program language evolved over time. So one thing might come up today is, do we need to go back and have BAE do additional analysis because what they've prepared doesn't necessarily capture everything as it's been adopted? And how do we want to address that?
I got him.
Thanks. So I recall very clearly, we said we were going to have an inclusionary ordinance and document, and we talked about what it would be. I don't recall that we had additions, so, but I may have forgotten. So what's the definition of addition?
We don't have one. So that would be part of the discussion that we would have to have moving forward if we wanted to include additions. And we can touch on, one of the things in the staff report was a list of all the jurisdictions that we were able to find kind of within the area or comparable to Atherton that have single-family inclusionary programs. One of those applies it to additions of 1,000 square feet or more. So we would need,
So that would be
one
an
of the-
expansion of the house, or if they,
that would be an expansion. And so that would be the type
not a
of,
remodel, it's an
Correct.
expansion.
correct.
And that wouldn't necessarily be for a JDU unit, or it would be specifically for JDU.
It would be distinct from a JADU.
Okay.
It would just be additional habitable area for the primary
All
residence.
right, fine, thanks. I'll just leave it up.
Why, when this study was done, did they not include a calculation on a fee for all construction and limit it to new buildings on vacant parcels or SB 9 splits? Seems like that's both was an egregious error, but also it means that to get any meaningful income, the fees on these projects that it did cover have to be pretty extreme.
So that level of detail was not provided to BAE. I wouldn't call that an error on that part, on their part. I would categorize it as that was what they had available to them at that time. And this type of program, as we've talked about in the staff report, is unique. There are jurisdictions that have pursued it, but they're not, they're not common, and some of them are currently in the court going over or fighting over the nexus of how you capture the additional jobs and housing demand needed from X amount of additional square footage, let alone demolition of a 1950s house, a new construction of a 2025 house, or demolition of a 2010 house, a new construction of a 2025 house. There's a lot of discrepancies there. And so what the courts are looking at is how you build that nexus argument to justify that.
part of the issue is with multifamily, you're bringing in a lot of people. Those people need jobs, those people need services, those people need resources. With single family, you don't. It's very hard to find that nexus to what that impact is.
And especially when you're looking at single family homes at the scale that we have in Atherton, it's not necessarily like you can say, well, it was demolition of a 1-bedroom single family home and then new construction of a 10,000 square foot single family home. The difference is challenging to capture here.
But we could go back and get a study done. and-
Absolutely.
Right.
Which is why
So-
I highlighted this issue, because I wanted to kind of gauge where the town was relative to pursuing that, knowing that it could have some legal challenges as well, but at least, being transparent about that as an option and needing to go back and refine
But
the
when I was
study.
looking at this 2 years ago, I mean, I was envisioning maybe a fee of $20 a foot.
Mhm.
It would still generate enough money for us to build multifamily housing that we owned and subcontracted the operation. I mean, these numbers are pretty significant.
Absolutely. And I think the kind of sticker shock, if you will, of the cost of construction of affordable housing is something that many jurisdictions are addressing right now. One of the things that I raised in the staff report at the very beginning is how prolific inclusionary housing programs are in the state, yet we're in a housing crisis. So many of the inclusionary fees set in these other jurisdictions don't actually price or are not actually priced at the unit. And so we see a lot of jurisdictions now wanting to prioritize construction over the in lieu option.
Well, I just want to add, I think there's 2 points that Bob's raised that are really relevant points here. One is the number of units that would apply. And if you're only focusing on vacant lots and SB9 splits, you're obviously applying the program to a much lesser number of units than if you're applying it to all new construction, whether or not you include additions. But also, in order to accumulate enough money to really have an impact, the fees are going to have to be higher, which is exactly his point. And I think these are things we can discuss, we'll discuss when we get into it. I'm glad they're highlighted. They need to be highlighted. My perspective was that it was an error because in fact, our housing element referred to additions, but the Nexus study didn't. And if we want to do anything other than the vacant lot and SB9 splits, we're going to have to go back and have some additional study done. But, hey, this whole process has taken us a very long time and we know it's not going to end quickly. So, and it's not going to end without having big impacts. We also know that.
And it's going to change over the years. too.
Yeah. So I think we just address
Like
this
a
as we
living
get to it.
document.
Okay. Any other questions on this slide? Then we can move on to the next. All right. And so at this point, I get to transfer it over to my colleague Asher Cohn, who's online.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. Hi, I'm Asher Cohn. I'm with M Group. I've been helping Brittany in the town with the housing element and now this inclusionary housing program. So it's nice to meet you all again. And the focus of my part here is talking about the BAE study in some detail. So the BAE study, as you can see, there's 2 types of analysis. There's a feasibility analysis and the in lieu fee analysis. The feasibility analysis looks at whether or not the program is feasible with the requirements the town is currently considering. And the and the in lieu fee analysis focuses on what the fee, that's the fee that can be applied in lieu of on-site construction of affordable units can be. So next slide, please. Thanks. We worked with BAE to develop 4 prototypes that are meant to capture the different types of development across both RM 2040 and then RM10 zones, as well as single family. We looked at the base density and the state density bonus program, which we'll get to in a moment. This slide is focused on base density. So to go through, the 4 prototypes include rental apartments at 20 units per acre, then rental and then for sale townhomes at 10 dwelling units an acre, and single-family for sale development. The table shows the tenure, rent or for sale, as well as the base densities prototypes, as well as the set aside, showing what percentage of units would need to be required to be affordable and at what income level. In the AMI threshold, which we talked about a bit a few minutes ago, the percentage of the AMI, that's annual median income, that the set aside units would be required to have. So for 2024, the area median income for San Mateo County is at 186,000. This generally means that a family of 4 could have a joint income of no more than $93,000 to be eligible for one of these units in prototypes 1 or 2. For prototype 3, we're assuming the affordable for sale units would be at 70% of AMI. So even though the town were to set the affordability threshold at 80% of AMI, which is typically the limit for a low income as opposed to very low, a developer would be likely to make the sale price affordable at 70% AMI in order to be eligible for the density bonus in this prototype, rather than a slightly higher sale price at 80%, which would make them forego the density bonus. And then prototype 4, the for sale single family prototype, does not have affordable for sale units because the affordable unit in this prototype is a rented ADU. So there's a lot of information on the slide, so I want to take a moment to make sure, if there's any questions, there's a good moment here to ask them of me, Brittany, and potentially Stephanie.
So I think Bay did a great job on this analysis. The question I have here is actually on prototype 3 on the average unit size. So you have 1,900 square feet. So can you define the square feet that you're using?
I can. That's in the next slide. So I don't know, Stephanie, you want to answer that now? Is that
This is Brittany Bendix.
Brittany? Okay.
We go ahead and take questions on just kind of the base categorization of the prototypes. And then in the next slide, we get into the assumed floor areas. And we have a larger table that we can then reference. Yeah.
My only question is, why did you use for prototype 2 and 3, which are basically similar forms of construction? Why did you use very low on the rentals and low on the for sale?
Stephanie, is that something you can address?
Yeah, hi everybody, Stephanie Hager, BAE Urban Economics. Thanks for having me tonight. When we first launched this study, the direction that we got was to assume a very low income level for the rental prototypes and I believe it was a low income affordability level for the for sale. We may have actually started out at moderate and then gone to low. That is something that you often see in inclusionary housing ordinances, is that the rental prototypes have a lower affordability targeting, or the requirements for rental units have a lower affordability targeting than for sale units. But that's something that you would have the authority to determine as a part of this process.
In prototype 3, it's low income and you used 70% of AMI, but in your study where you give out the affordability of market rate multifamily rental units, where you lay out the entire complex system of maximum affordable monthly rent, you show that the low income amounts are 51 to 80% of AMI, and elsewhere you've used 80%. And why did you set? I don't understand 70%. What's the meaning of that?
Sure. Do you want me to go ahead and respond to that?
Yeah, please, Stephanie.
So yeah, the low income AMI threshold, the maximum income level that is typically used for that is 80% of AMI. In this case, we're assuming that the actual affordability level for these units would be targeted to 70% of AMI, because if the town were to set the maximum at 80% of AMI, consistent with the typical maximum income level for a low income unit, what you are likely to see is that a developer will instead voluntarily choose to make the units affordable at 70% of AMI, because the California State Density Bonus Law for for sale units defines a low income unit as being affordable at 70% of AMI. So if they can bring down those sale prices just enough to target 70% instead of 80%, they're eligible for the density bonus. If they target those units to 80% of AMI, they're not eligible.
And what would the bonus?
So that'll get developed a little bit more on the next
Good.
slide, but low is defined as 80% or lower. In this case, 70% is used because queuing into the next slide, we analyzed the prototypes with using a density bonus scenario. And in order to be at that eligibility for the density bonus program, you had to have 70% under low versus 80. Some of the, I think the reason the state does that is because when you create units that are supposed to be low captures everything from 61% to 80. So if you're the developer, you would lend towards renting that unit or selling that unit closer to 80 than you would at 61. So the state kind of uses their own programming to hit those areas that often get ignored because they're in the middle and they're not at the fringe of the categories. Does that make sense?
They
I see
built an
some of you
incentive-
nodding.
They built an incentive to meet the target for a bonus.
Correct.
So as I brought up yesterday, some of the things that we looked at, one of the things that's on this bottom chart is the size of the units. And, you know, I question the size of the units as compared to the newer things that are being built today. I don't know where that number would have come from.
Are we on that slide yet?
No.
Skipping ahead.
Well, it's the same page, you know.
Well,
sorry.
but
Okay,
let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Asher, if you could go ahead and
Sure thing.
introduce that table.
All right, I'll wait. Flip the chart.
We're here.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Flip the chart and I'll raise my hand.
Well,
Okay.
let Asher describe the chart first.
Yeah, I'll just walk through this and then we can talk about unit size. Thank you. So thank you for those questions. So this table is set up and there's three kind of big sections, top, middle, bottom. The top section has the same information as the last slide, and we added site size as well. The second section that starts with number of units per base density, this section models how the density bonus would apply, showing the base units and the prototype's density. So that's base density multiplied by site size. And then the number of those units that'd be affordable to lower income families. So that's the italicized with, for prototype 1, 6 units, which is 20% of the base density, 30 units. And then we show the density bonus, which is the percent of additional units allowed based on the percentage of affordability and affordability level. And then those are summed up in that bolded final row showing total units. This final section that we've already had some questions about shows how the development is modeled in terms of the average unit size, which is say net square feet, and the total number of parking spaces. And this displays what the viable standards for the development are. Since there's no multifamily development history in Atherton, BAE was able to draw on other jurisdictions for reference. So I'll pause here because it sounds like there's some questions. we can
Councilmember
discuss.
DeGoya has a question.
Well, if I could follow up with the question that I asked.
Councilmember
First.
Whitmer can go first if you want, since you already started.
Yeah, so did you look at the average of all types of apartments in Palo Alto and Menlo Park? Or did you look at the newer things? Because the newer things are larger, they're more expensive than what you're showing here in your report, which we haven't gotten to that chart either, I'm sorry. But you know, if you did a survey of the newer places in Redwood City, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, which, you know, the latter two you said were what you really focused on, I think you'd find that your numbers are off. And I think the construction costs are off too. I don't think that they have the Atherton markup, if you say, in that. And so I feel that this type of information is not correct. And I don't know, you know, if we could correct it or just have you go back and look at the newer apartments that have been built and that are leasing for the last, that are become available the last 2 or 3 years, such as the Stanford apartments, such as the Greenheart facility, such as the stuff that's being built down along Palo Alto on El Camino and on Page Mill. Those are what, that's going to be the new stuff that would be consistent with what's going to be built here.
So, so on this, I think I can help on this. And so what BAE's task here is to decide, the threshold where having an inclusionary program can, that the market
yeah.
would afford it. And so the fact that the square footage is higher only says,
Well, it's not
It
just
just
the
makes it
square
better.
footage, it's the cost of construction,
Yeah.
et cetera, if you looked at, if, I just don't think that the analysis was based on what will be built here as opposed.
And I completely
And,
agree with
and
that.
new, and the newer ones. Yes, you can get rent by looking at some dilapidated building where they're getting people in. They have a lot of those in Menlo Park. And, I mean, and you can get a low rate there. I just don't think that it was appropriate, but I brought that up yesterday, sorry. And you didn't send out a letter, George. I didn't see one, so I figured I'd just bring it up here. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
So while we're on the unit size, can I get my question answered? Which is, what's the definition of the square foot?
Stephanie, do you?
Yeah. So to answer sort of part of that question, we did look at newer projects in the area. So the unit sizes that we're looking at are reflective of what we saw within newer construction, primarily in Menlo Park and Palo Alto. I will sort of point your attention to the fact that for prototype 1, which is the more sort of traditional multifamily building, the unit size that you're seeing here is a net square footage. So the gross square footage would be, maybe 15% larger than this on a per unit basis. So this is the number that we saw for that unit type based on what we're seeing in the area. For prototype 2 and 3, this would be livable square footage. For prototype 3, it was again based on what we had seen looking at recently built for sale townhouses in the area. And sort of what that unit mix looked like among a few of those projects and what the square footage was by bedroom size for that type of product. For prototype 2, it's a little bit of a different situation because we don't see a lot of rental, build to rent townhomes in this region. It is something that we're seeing sort of, further out Bay Area and elsewhere, but build to rent townhomes really aren't something that we see a whole lot of. So we had to sort of make some assumptions that we thought were reasonable. Generally, this type of product, when it's build to rent, tends to have smaller unit sizes than what you might see in a for sale product type. So that's sort of how we arrived at these particular square footages. What we're looking at for prototype 1 is net square footage. For prototype 2 and 3, it's livable square footage.
Do you still have a question?
Bringing up the Encinal Roger Reynolds site. You want to look at a local one, that's the one we should have. Kept bringing it up. It's been brought up about 10 times in the discussions here. The price of what they're going for is substantially higher than what you show. The sizes are bigger and the construction cost was higher.
So, but actually prototype 3 is the marquee project.
Yeah, or the newer ones, like, for example, the Greenheart facility,
Well, what I mean is the 14 units per acre.
Yeah.
This is marquee.
Yeah.
And I'll come back and make a point about that, but this is the marquee project.
You ready? Councilmember DeGoya would like to make a comment.
So I'm just wondering about the density bonus, which has quite an impact in here, obviously. Does this density bonus apply assuming that 20% of the units are going to meet the affordability threshold that is set forth here? And I think it does. That's why it's here. If that percent were set at 15%, would they still qualify for, if they only built if we required 15% and they built 15% of the affordable units, would they still qualify for the density bonus?
You're eligible for the density bonus, the state's program, just by having 5 or more units in your project.
No, I understand.
The nuance then becomes what your voluntary percentage is and at what affordability level that you're proposing.
But if somebody builds only 15%, I understand you have to
Sure.
have 5 units to qualify. In every case, we're talking about more than 5 units. So if they were to build only 15% at the affordable category, would they be able to take advantage of a density bonus? Or
Yes.
are they excluded?
No, they can take advantage of it at 15%. I can go into the law and see if I can find what the lowest amount is and that affordability level. But I know that 15% would be included.
There's a chart.
Yeah.
So there's a sliding scale. Starts at one affordable unit.
One affordable unit, no matter what, that is one of X.
But how many?
I don't know, 1 out of 40.
No, but- Uh-huh. Okay, great.
Once they hit the five units, they're in they're in a bonus category. And then it's just a matter of how many they decide to make.
if any.
Once they have 5 units
Yes.
as part of their project,
Right.
net new 5
Right.
units, they are eligible so long as a proportion of
Right.
those 5
Right.
are at an affordability level.
Right.
I have just a global question about this discussion. How significant, what kind of impacts would that have on what we are overlaying on our zoning projects here?
What, sorry,
You know,
which,
for development,
How many
Yeah.
units would it add?
how many units would it add?
Well, that's what this says right down here on these numbers, right? These are the numbers that are added.
That's the 70% base. The density bonus would add 21, so the total would be 51.
Correct. And 17, so it'd be 26.
so what Councilmember DeGolia is explaining is based on this table, the density bonus line where it says 21, 7, 4, and then
Mhm.
not applicable, that's showing you how many additional units they're getting.
Mhm. And this is per
They could
acre,
get.
per acre.
They could get
Could
in
get it,
addition to the base. So looking at that kind of
Yeah.
second clustered or second
Mhm.
combined row, you have for prototype 1, your base density gives you 30 units. If
30,
6
right.
of those are affordable at
Right.
very low income
it.
levels,
Yeah.
then you get a 70% bonus, which results in 21 for a total of 51, where
that's
only 6
different.
of those are affordable.
And that's at the 20% requirement?
Yeah, but I don't
Yes.
think the-
This,
might
th-
be-
this is for a
Setback
1.5.
requirements.
Your analysis is for a
Right, and
1.5
that first
acres.
prototype though, that's for RM 20 and
units per acre,
40.
yeah.
So if we're talking
College.
about RM 10, we'd want to look more at prototype 3. Prototype 2 was found as we get to
Not
not
applicable,
feasible.
Right.
So focusing on prototype 3 is
Three,
the
uh-huh.
model that's likely. You have 10 units and then 2 of those would be affordable
Actually,
at low
6 might
income
be.
levels. That then gives you a 35% increase.
Yeah,
The density bonus rounds that up, so you get 4, and then you're at a total of 14,
yeah,
where only 2 are affordable.
got it.
And that's
That seems
Well, this is assuming that.
very affordable or very low? Just
At low,
low affordable,
not at very low.
not at very.
So
low.
if you were to say that you wanted the inclusionary housing program to focus on very low income,
Mhm.
then presumably that density bonus would go up
Would have to.
because you're providing a deeper level of affordability and the state wants to reward you for that.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
to go up to 50%.
So
yeah.
Did you or anybody look at when you're adding these number of units? Now, of course, for type 1 is college, so that would be, you know, a 4-story building, but on some of the other areas, did anybody look at our setback requirements and our other requirements that we have and see whether or not that number of units could actually be built on a site of half acre or more.
With our height limitations.
So we did share an early version of potential development standards.
Yeah.
With BAE, and we have discussed with Stephanie the FAR that was adopted. But these necessarily weren't modeled exactly on
Okay.
what you've been looking at as part of the
Okay, so
design
the number
standard.
here could be smaller.
It could be, Stephanie, you can chime in here too, because I think we decided is that really it would be a difference of maybe 500 square feet. Is that where we landed?
Yeah. So a couple things to note on
Mm-hmm.
that. For these prototypes, we're assuming that they would all receive a density bonus. And so under the density bonus law, in addition to the density bonus, projects are also eligible for waivers, concessions, and incentives related to development standards. So if a developer wanted to come in and build a project that slightly exceeded the FAR requirements, they may be able to request to do that under those provisions of the state density bonus law. The FAR standards or other development standards could potentially affect which we haven't gotten to yet, but the alternative versions of these pro formas where we look at a scenario where a developer pays an in lieu fee, because in that case, the projects would not be eligible for those special provisions under the state density bonus law. And so, if that were the case, then we would maybe assume, slightly smaller unit sizes, something around, maybe we need to bring unit sizes down by somewhere between 300 and 500 square feet. I think the overall effect of that on the study would be just to show a larger gap in feasibility between, or profitability between that baseline scenario and what we're looking at here. So we can talk about that more when we get to some of the finding slides. But I think it's helpful to keep in mind what the implications of making those changes would be on the overall findings. And I think that we would end up sort of in the same place where we are now if we were to make that change.
So as a follow on to that, then, of course, we made our development standards because our goal was to protect the neighbors. And so if the density bonus allows them to overrun our density, which she just said, then there's no protection. Is there a way that we can continue to have our setback requirements and height requirements and et cetera, in place?
Not with the standards that were adopted. And this gets back to the notion that you don't have to adopt an inclusionary housing program for somebody to come in and use the density bonus program.
Okay, I think then that should be something we should focus on then, because somebody could really build a 51-story building right next to Mr. Riddle's house.
No, they cannot. But we talked about this when we were talking about our objective design standards. that
Yeah,
when
right.
somebody does come in and use the density bonus provisions of state law, they're entitled to certain waivers or exceptions based on how much affordable units they provide. If they provided 100% affordability, yeah, they're entitled to some exceptions, but they're not going to get a 51-story building.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to scare the public with that. It would be a reasonable facility. It would be into the setbacks and it would exceed our FARs and our height and other things, but that would be something that state law allows.
I think Stacy has a question.
Can you guys provide a overview? Because we've heard this broad strokes of you get waivers and that, like, how does that process work? Is that something that we are going to identify what those concessions are and create a program? Or is that something that the state dictates? Like, how do they apply for this waiver? How does it get evaluated? Is there a menu that they're looking at? Like, how does
There's
this
no
work?
menu. It's it's facilitated by the state. They can seek a waiver from pretty much any of the development standards that we've adopted, but they're limited in the number of how many that they can apply.
And they apply it to us. They apply to us for the waiver or they apply to the state?
They apply to us.
they apply to us.
And that comes in front of the planning commission? It comes in front
It's
of.
all at the staff level.
Ministerial.
So how, like, I mean, what's the, is there a threshold here? Like, it's not like they're going to be able to add 3 stories to a 2-story, like, is there?
The threshold gets into, well, so they have, it's on the jurisdiction to say that the exception does not facilitate the construction of the affordable units, which is how the developer is supposed to justify it. One of the things that's come up here before is some concern in terms of, well, how does the jurisdiction do that? And that discussion then dives into legal issues with how and when a jurisdiction can say no, and to the extent to which there's confidence in capability of doing so. Mona, if you're there, would you like to chime in on this piece?
I think we could try and block that.
Yes, so when a project has qualified for a density bonus incentive, there's really very little to no things that we can do. They are entitled based on, exactly like Brittany said, the portion of their project that's affordable up to a certain number of bonuses. And it's actually the applicant's option as to which one of the incentives they would like to pick. So we have very significant limitations on that. But to George's point, we're not going to be seeing, you know, a 50-story unit. There is a max number of additions that they also get.
Mona, excuse me, this is Elizabeth Lewis, and I would just, you know, we're using an egregious number of 50-story building, but I mean, even a 5-story building or 8-story building would not be acceptable in our neighborhoods.
I don't think that would realistically happen because again, we're looking at a percentage increase based on the number of affordable units. Let's say it's 20% and they're getting 2 incentives. So there is a cap on the number of units that they're getting. I cannot envision a scenario in which we're ever going to have those multi-story buildings in the town.
Actually, I can.
I'd like to
So-
add that the builder's remedy allows carte blanche.
Right now,
Yeah, I know.
At
That's where I got the
20%
number.
affordable.
Came from it.
So if that was something that was viable,
It would happen
it's
now.
actually possible right now.
no, but that's why we need to get our
So-
housing, you know, element.
And to add to
approved.
that, the state has adopted laws to make a builder's remedy even easier on the affordability front, lowering the percentage of affordable units that you need to have below 20. So it's now more flexible to do that. So just putting
But-
that there for context.
And just to, setting aside, you know, the builder's remedy though, and looking at this in the context of when we have our approved housing element, when we have our inclusionary housing ordinance and an applicant who wishes to exercise a density bonus based on kind of the 4 corners of their project and meeting those requirements, we do still have maximum densities within our zoning code that we have adopted. And so any additional units is based on those. So in other words, it's tacked on to those maximums. It's not indefinite. They cannot build, you know, 100 units per acre because that's just not within the realm of possibility.
So I'd like to clarify some of this. And so the first point is that in the density bonus program, by zoning RM10, creating that zoning, developers can come in, they can say that they're going to do the 20%, or we can require them to do the 20%. But at that point, they have a right that's been given to them by the state. And the right allows them to require the town to waive design standards that get in the way of them building their project. And there is no limit on that. It is unlimited. And so if you go to the ABAG site where they talk about how towns implement this, That includes FAR, includes the coverage ratio, includes height limits, it includes setbacks, and includes XXX. And so the applicant will submit their plan to planning, and planning has to make a decision, not whether it complies with our design requirements, but whether on a different set of standards, whether to approve or deny. That's really where we're at. And so this prototype number 3, this is the marquee project with 16-foot setbacks, 30-foot sidewall heights, right? It's got 2,200 square foot units, to Bill's point. That's what this project is. And the only way this project gets built is by taking advantage of the state density bonus, because otherwise if it didn't do that, it wouldn't meet our design standards. And so that's the only way it happens. And just to Mona's point, in general, I agree, that developers aren't going to build a 5-story building. There's one exception, and that's 23 Oak Grove, or not Oak Grove, Oakwood. I mean, they can go as much as 32 units in terms of the density. That's, to 32 units is where you can start talking about a multi-story building.
Is what he said agreeable to everybody? I mean, that's the reality.
It's a bad law, and that's the bad law. Yeah.
But I would disagree. I mean, that requires a developer to get to 100% affordable units. And that's not the Marquee Development project. The Marquee Development only provides 3 BMR units in its entire development. Yeah, size and all those sorts of things. But in order to get more than 18 units, they've got to do it at 100% affordability.
Yeah. So we should get this question answered. The way I've read the law.
Because I really can't.
What is the question?
Yeah.
Can you do 100%
No,
density
no, no.
bonus project?
No.
Yes.
Can they do the Marquee project with 2% with 20% inclusionary, and have the town waive everything to allow that project?
Require the town to waive.
Yeah, requires the town to waive
Because the town
all of-
would not
everything required
voluntarily
to build that project
waive that.
with 20% inclusionary.
So even if they could, let's say they did, we still wouldn't have, if that's really a possibility, there's nothing we can do about that. So that's not a solution. So the solution is to come up with a framework that is reasonable for the town and have that be the focus point of where they start thinking about how to do development. That's the most we can do. And then if somebody wants to come in here and say, hey, well, shoot, forget all that stuff, and I'm a .org and I don't need to make money on this project, and I'm just going to build this project because I think the world needs it, then the state would say, okay, then fine. So there's nothing we can do about that stuff. But we can make regulations that say it's reasonable to say this is the way we'd like the town to develop, given the rules that we have. Then when staff makes their recommendations, they can have a foundation say, that doesn't really fit the intent here. We're about affordable housing, but we're not about bad affordable housing. So then the foundation of the staff recommendation has something that we put in
To
place.
stand on.
I mean, I'm looking at the design standards that were adopted for the RM10 program.
Okay.
We have setbacks, height, we have sidewalls, front walls,
Landscaping.
parking, landscaping, floor area, lot coverage. If at most you get 3 concessions or waivers, you as the developer then have to pick which of those you're going to seek
But Brittany, that's not
reliance from.
my understanding. So the code, the summary from ABAG is very clear on this. Waivers are unlimited. Concessions are 3 or 4.
But what waivers mean that the zoning standard makes it impossible for them to do their project.
Right.
That's right.
And it's not-
So Mona's
that's a
going to chime
higher
in.
standard than a reduction.
4 is the upper limit of concessions.
Right.
Except actually under new state law, if you're a builder's remedy, you get a bonus of 2 more.
Yeah.
So builder's remedy can get 6.
Well,
So again,
we're hoping not to have any builders renovate.
yeah.
So Mona had something.
Yeah.
If I can just clarify, right? So a waiver occurs even with, for example, an SB9 project right now, that comes into play and says that there is no way that or even an ADU. There's no way for me to construct this ADU within the setbacks that are set forth in state law or the town's code, unless I am able to shift it because my property doesn't have enough setback. Under that, if it's physically infeasible because of the topography of the site, or let's say there's, a heritage tree, and our preference is that they keep the heritage tree, but they shift the location, that is one aspect that we would have to review in order to allow and make the development capable of occurring. Incentives and concessions, on the other hand, apply generally for density bonuses. So they're 2 different issues. Waivers can apply to other projects that have nothing to do with density bonus, but density bonus is applicable when a project includes some sort of affordability component. And the government code specifically also says that when you're looking at concessions or incentives, the purpose behind it is a reduction in site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements or architectural design requirements that result in identifiable and actual cost reductions to provide for affordable housing costs. So if I don't anticipate this happening, but if the town could demonstrate that the types of incentives and concessions that they're asking for don't actually result in identifiable cost reductions that further affordable housing development, then it's something that we would be able to preclude. The only other instance that we'd be able to really preclude someone from seeking a specific type of density bonus incentive or concession is if we put in writing and make specific findings that there's going to be a specific adverse impact on health and safety if they were to proceed with the type of incentive or concession that they want. But, our hands are limited, but there are some safeguards too. I just wanted to clarify that.
And a developer can't come in and say, I want to develop 40 units on this site. That's an impossible thing on our density. Therefore, all your requirements are waived. The developer can't do that. They have to be able to say, this is what the density is. This is what I'm allowed. And based on that, if I can't do it on this site, then I can look at the waiver situation.
That's fair. But on this scenario here, prototype 3, they can require the town to waive all of the design standards to build this specific project in prototype 3, which is the marquee project.
Only if it's
I think that
physically
you're
feasible.
saying something that has been refuted, Tom. I don't think that what you keep asserting is, being vetted by the attorney and by the
Mona tried to jump in.
Mona.
again.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
took your
Yeah.
spot.
No, I agree with that statement. I think the only way is if it's physically infeasible to be constructed, would we grant those waivers? But they are not entitled by right to unlimited waivers just because they've asked for it. They have to demonstrate why they need the waiver and how without the waiver, it would not be capable of being constructed.
Oh,
But
okay.
an unintended consequence of this 20% requirement in the RM10 projects, should they materialize, is that there's a huge incentive to go after the density bonuses and the density exceptions. Whereas if we didn't have the 20% requirement, I think we could make the case that a developer can build 10 market rate units with the cost of land, the cost of construction, et cetera, and take plenty of money home to his wife or husband to spend on vacations, et cetera. In other words, I think the projects pencil out. The minute you insert affordability, then you got to do things. And so we may have started down a bad path.
Right, and,
So-
and that's the policy call for the
Right,
council.
yeah, exactly. I was just going to say,
without the
that's one of the
inclusionary
things.
ordinance, There's no requirement for affordability.
And then.
Say it
does that
again, I
reflect
couldn't hear
that-
anything you
I was-
said.
Sorry, that's the policy conversation for the
That's
council here, because without the inclusionary ordinance, there's no requirement that any of the new multifamily RM10 zones that we've struggled to identify are required to have multifamily, are required to have affordability.
Affordable.
There's no requirement for that.
And then how do we meet our affordability numbers with our with our plan?
But I don't think.
It will be
that
redone.
RM10 doesn't address.
Well,
that at all.
you would meet it
So we don't.
if
need
you collected an inclusionary fee on all construction in the town and then proceeded down a path to develop, for the town to develop affordable housing. You also could do it if there's a way to collect these inclusionary fees and somehow transfer that money so that these college campus buildings that we keep talking about that have never been built, so that they could be built.
Right.
But there's
That's how you would do it.
there's
But
no inclusionary fee without an inclusionary ordinance.
I understand, but the inclusionary ordinance could exclude
Yeah,
the,
there's
could
no-
exclude the RM10 properties. It could strictly relate to,
RM20?
So the college has to develop
It's
their
the-
property.
I know, and we don't want to charge them a fee because that's going to make it worse.
Yeah, it's important.
But
that,
the
you know,
include, I presume the inclusionary ordinance
fees.
could do what I said.
Yeah.
and-
I think it's very important we have the fees because our biggest projects are at the school and the college. And they need some financing
They need
to
to
move
do
them
And
along.
can we in fact collect that fee and dole it out to the schools to build whatever we want built, they want built?
So just to give you a time check, we're about halfway through the amount of time that we had
Yeah. uh-huh.
allocated for
Yeah.
this discussion.
So-
That's fine. I'm just trying to give everybody a sense of where we are. The next slide gets into the residual land value and then going into the feasibility analysis or closing out the feasibility analysis.
Anthony. you put
And
the
then we
slide
get
back up.
into the in lieu fee analysis.
So-
Which it seems like we're starting to head that direction. So I'm wondering if we should just
Cut to
end
the
or
chase.
finish the slides on the feasibility analysis,
Mhm.
move on to in lieu fee,
Mhm.
do public comment perhaps,
Mhm.
and then either dive into discussion or maybe table that for another meeting, depending on where we're at by that time.
Well, yeah, maybe we could dive into the discussion section kind of sooner rather than later and look at exactly what staff is needing us to opine on. And that will kind of bring our focus back and we'll, I don't know, or. we
Before you
can-
go to discussion though, don't forget public comment.
But I don't want to, if you want to just,
We'll finish, we'll
March on.
finish out the analysis.
Mhm.
And then I'll check back in with you.
okay,
All right, Asher, it's you. Next slide,
Okay.
please.
Next slide. Okay. So we talk about these prototypes, and just want to touch upon briefly residual land value. So residual land value is the value of the completed project less its development costs. And if this value is greater than 5 to 6.5 million, which is the estimated value of an acre of vacant land in Atherton, then the project is financially feasible. Next slide, please.
Well,
I-
but
yeah.
let's just be clear.
Okay.
That number is the value of vacant land in certain areas of Atherton,
It's-
which happen to be those areas we've looked at for RM10. It's not the value of any vacant land in Atherton.
Right.
In fact, it's not the value of most vacant land in Atherton.
Yeah.
But it seems applicable to those areas that we have looked at.
sort, yeah. And it's really an arbitrary number. But you got to plug something in.
Would you like Stephanie to talk a little bit more about reached?
Sure.
No.
Okay.
We trust you.
It's an average.
It's an average, okay.
Yeah.
Are very expensive.
But I agree
pieces
with
of land.
Councilmember DeGolia on that.
And
Okay.
it's in this, yeah, next to study that is an attachment. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide then. Thank you. So this gets into the in lieu fee analysis. I'm sorry, just get ahead of myself. Okay, so this shows the residual land value for the 4 prototypes. That's that bolded row in the middle, and describes how, you know, for prototypes 1, 3, and 4, this value is above the feasibility threshold, showing they're feasible under current conditions, which is not the case for prototype 2. Next slide, please.
So again, just what the slide says, based on their analysis, is that the marquee project is viable, but requires, you know, ignoring all of the design standards.
Why do you say that?
Doesn't ignore the
That's
design
exactly-
standards.
Yeah.
Doesn't ignore them. Yeah.
But because you can't build it. If
Uh,
either,
Is that what
Not
that
relevant.
says? I don't think that
That's what they're
says.
saying.
Well,
Okay.
somebody building townhouses for sale may not be building the number of units that are over there, for example. So I agree. You're saying that they maximize it. And so I understand what you're saying.
Okay. It's a bigger site. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
go on.
Gonna
Brittany.
move to in lieu fee analysis. Great. So this gets into what fee to set, and there are 3 approaches listed here. The nexus basis, which goes the fee commensurate with revenue required to meet the affordable housing need. That's that nexus basis we discussed previous. The cost of construction approach looks at what the fee would covering the cost of constructing an affordable unit. And point of indifference looks at what it approximates the cost of that affordable unit that would, in order to incentivize on-site construction. And generally speaking, the higher a lieu fee is, the more it incentivizes on-site construction, is that higher fee be weighed against the cost of the construction itself. Okay,
Upside
go to the
down.
next slide, please.
Yeah, yeah. It seems upside
And
down.
this is my last slide as part of this. So BAE analyzed this dollar per square foot fee that be charged under these 3 approaches. And you can see these again in that middle section of this table. So this table lists those fees and notes the most financially feasible scenario, which would be an inclusionary project with a density bonus for prototypes 1, 2, and 3. For prototype 4, the single family project, developers may generally choose to pay an in lieu fee rather than provide a deed restricted affordable ADU. And just before I conclude, to add another wrinkle, as we talk about this table and talk about in lieu fees, the city does not necessarily need to choose the same fee approach for single and multifamily. They could choose, you know, for example, nexus basis for multifamily, point of a difference for single family. There is flexibility there.
Right.
So if you go to the next slide.
That would be, as long as the incentive look of the multifamily looked lower than single family. You couldn't do it the reverse, correct? You couldn't have a higher fee structure relative to multifamily than single family.
If that's how the numbers worked out relative to the analysis we were using, that would be okay.
Okay,
What's a problem is if you set fees higher than what you see here.
okay, got it. All right, that makes sense. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
So when they develop the fees, I'd like to know a little bit more about it because as I pointed out the other day, there are some fees, like for example, for single family in some of your charts, that it's more expensive to pay the fee by over $150,000 than what you can do to go get a pre-built one and have it installed 100% on your property for $300,000. So I didn't understand how they got that. I realized that we're given the option to set the fee at whatever we want. but I didn't understand how that number could have actually appeared on a chart and a recommendation. As I mentioned.
Stephanie, can you address that, please?
I'm not sure I followed the question.
I think
Is
I
what they
understood the
wanted to keep.
question as where is, for the single family home prototype, the prototype for, how are we getting to these numbers relative to the cost of an ADU?
Oh, I see.
Presuming that an ADU might be, you could get a prefab ADU that would be less expensive than these numbers extrapolated out by square footage.
Yeah, the cost of construction approach is the one that is meant to capture the cost that it would take to build an ADU on a property. So that fee rate you'll see for the single family is a lot lower than the other two, and that's what that is meant to represent. The other two fees on here, the Nexus basis fee is really based on the need required, the need generated by new single family home development. And the point of indifference is really really based on that threshold of, what the incentives are to the developer. So those aren't really connected to the cost of construction. It's this $29 for the single family that's related to cost of
Yeah,
construction.
but your table 18 shows that the in lieu fee you're recommending for a single family house is 482,347. And if I'm on page, well, it's in the pack, it's page 72 of 100.
It's not in the
Okay.
handout.
And so, I'm telling you that you can go up the street to Abood and you can get installed, 100% installed, placed on your property and then fully installed, a $300,000 ADU.
Yeah, so I should clarify that what we have in table 18 and really throughout this table is not necessarily a recommendation for what the fee rates should be. It's different ways of approaching the fee for your consideration. So what's in table 18 doesn't have anything to do with what it costs to build an ADU on the property. It's what fee level is at about the level that might be necessary from an economic perspective to incentivize a developer to want to provide that ADU rather than not provide the ADU and pay a fee instead. So for the developer, it's about, are they losing money? They might be building that unit at a loss if they need to make it an affordable ADU.
Well, I think we need to collect the money and we need to have a fee for everything, but it can't be a fee that it's more expensive than doing it. There may be reasons they don't want to do it.
I think that's the point. We want them to do ADUs.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they maybe don't
that's-
want to have
that's
a
the
deed
discussion I
restricted
wanna have.
ADU.
Is what exactly is the
We haven't
policy objective
decided
here?
that yet.
And then that helps us inform which approach is the preferred one
Mhm.
or seems to be more preferred based on what I'm hearing and the feedback that I'm getting.
Okay. Well, fine.
So you're asking, so let me make sure I understand that. That means, do we prefer to have more ADUs than more multifamily? Is that what we're saying?
No,
Okay,
but I'm about to segue
okay.
into my
Okay, good,
asks.
good. Thank you.
Yeah, which is,
So I have the next slide after this one, if we're done with this one,
which are the recommendations.
would be going into the recommendations.
Mhm.
So what I can do is run through these quickly to kind of plant the seed in your mind of what I'm going to be coming back and asking you more directly. Once we get through these slides, I'd recommend going to public comment so that we can hear from members of the public. And then we'll go back to, we'll start at recommendation 1 and go through them.
Okay.
So recommendation 1 was to consider adoption of the inclusionary housing requirements that are consistent with what is in the housing element. The feedback that I'm looking for here as staff is, do we need to distinguish between multifamily rental and multifamily ownership typologies when we're crafting an ordinance? Are we pursuing 20% as the requirement? Are we pursuing affordability at lower income? Would we set that lower? Would we maybe look higher? And how does that relate to our RENA goals, depending on what we choose? Then also, do we distinguish between a program specific for the RM 20 and 40 categories, which we had analyzed here as very low, or the RM 10, which were analyzed as low? And that's kind of all embodied under recommendation 1. Next
Okay.
slide.
Can I ask you a question?
There's our next
Yes,
slide.
we should.
What is pursue affordability requirement of lower income? What is that?
That's setting the requirement for X% at lower income levels,
But what is
low,
lower?
very
We
low.
have extremely low, which we're not dealing with in the recommendations. We have very low, which is recommended for the 2040 units.
Mhm.
And we have low. We don't have lower in
Yeah.
the categories that you've presented.
So lower here is just a placeholder,
Is what?
is a placeholder
For what?
for low, very low, extremely
Well,
low.
but shouldn't we
Or could-
be specific?
That's what I'm asking for the
Okay.
feedback.
So you're
So
saying,
at
which
what
do you
level?
want?
Which
Yeah.
do you
Mhm.
want?
Okay,
Exactly.
fine. That's fair. Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Next slide. Recommendation 2 is to adopt the new inclusionary housing requirements concurrently with the adoption of upcoming zoning changes that will implement the housing element programs. We've already done that, so this not
We're good.
requiring any feedback on that.
We're good on
area.
that.
Recommendation 3, next slide, is to consider the adoption of inclusionary housing in lieu fees for projects that do not provide inclusionary units on site. So this gets at if you're going to have an inclusionary program and you have to provide an alternative to on-site construction, what is that alternative? Is it an in lieu fee, which I'm presuming here in terms of our discussion? Is there strong feelings that it should be something else like a land dedication? That was addressed in the analysis and it came out recommending as a fee and not some other alternative, but that's up for discussion as well. Is there a preferred approach to the application of an in lieu fee? And this gets into, are we only looking at for sale versus rental? Is there, what's the basis for the fee? Are we going to use nexus basis, cost of construction, or point of indifference? Is it the same for every element or type of housing project that we're looking at? Is the option to pursue an in lieu fee approved ministerially by staff or at the discretion of the council? I had that in here because when we were going through the housing element adoption process, I was hearing a lot of feedback that there wasn't a desire to have any sort of in lieu program and that you wanted to mandate construction. I think we've kind of introduced why we need an alternative. If you want to make an in lieu fee more challenging, you could set that as a discretionary decision, meaning that a developer has to go before the city council, for example.
There's no one
Is
to do
that something that we want to do? It doesn't have to be for every housing program that we have, but thinking that through is something that needs to happen. And then last on the slide, is the in lieu fee and process the same for RM 20 and 40, RM 10 and single family projects? That kind of gets at what I already mentioned. Next slide. Recommendation 4, to the extent that Atherton decision makers prefer that new single family homes provide deed restricted ADUs rather than pay an in lieu fee, consider policies to make the deed restricted ADU option more attractive to project applicants. So this recommendation, I'm kind of focusing I'm focusing the discussion on single family homes because I'm not entirely sure where this group lands on that. So should the inclusionary program apply to single family properties? That's a big question for me as staff. If so, to what extent? Are we looking at all single family residential construction, including additions, which would require, as I've mentioned, some revisions to the study? Do we want to do only new construction or just new construction on undeveloped sites? And then should the fee be set to incentivize deed restricted ADUs?
Yeah.
So then this looks like using your levers of high fee versus low fee to incentivize actual construction. You might see that for single family homes, the approach is the opposite of what you might do on RM10 or RM20 and 40 properties.
Could I add to your narrative here? Because in the staff report and, on page 15, there's a lot more information than this brief summary, which I think is really good because what you say here is that you surveyed other inclusionary housing programs in Bay Area and more broadly that apply to single-family dwellings. Very few jurisdictions within California that are comparable to Atherton apply inclusionary housing requirements to single-family projects. Of the 27 jurisdictions surveyed by staff, 21 had inclusionary housing ordinances. Table 4 shares these findings, and it said only 2 did not entirely import. The city of Sonoma requires an in lieu fee and for developments of 4 or fewer units, Sonoma County. So it says only renovations of less than 1,000 square feet are exempt. So, I mean, I think we should, kind of focus on more of her narrative and explanation about this recommendation number 4 before we make a decision, because I think it's, we kind of skimmed on the top. You did a nice little summary, but,
Yeah,
more
but
information is
at the
really
end of the-
important.
At the end of the day, though, that's the only thing that's being built around here at this point in time. And so if we're going to collect any money to help incentivize and start some of the things over at the college, for example, which is our largest number of units that we need to get built, then I think it needs to apply to single-family homes. Maybe the price doesn't,
To
should
allow
be
them
changed.
to buy out of the, opt out of
Yeah,
the requirement to build an ADU.
yeah,
Well, no, not to build an ADU.
a
but
deed restricted one.
Build an ADU that's deed restricted.
Well, that's
Yeah,
what we have
which-
to decide all of that.
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because they'll
Or we
build
can
it
have
because they
another
get the
meeting.
free, they
We
get
don't
the
have to
free
decide anything
FAR.
right now.
There's a lot of incentive to building an ADU. You get the extra square footage and things like that.
That's- I
But
thought we
if
already
it's deed
built that
restricted,
in.
now they have to think about it.
I understand that there's a lot of nuances that you'd want to
Yeah.
discuss, but for me, actually, having feedback that you're interested in even having that discussion
Mhm.
and moving it forward
Mhm.
is important to hear
Good.
today.
Yes, great.
So if that's as far as we get
Okay.
on single family homes, that's very useful for me.
Okay.
Good.
So is it okay with everyone if we have public comment right now before we make any
Sure.
other further decisions? So I'll open the floor up for any member of the public to come forward. Please remember, comments are limited to 3 minutes, and come to the podium and state your name and your comment to us, please.
And if there's no one in the room, we do have one online.
Okay, Jeff?
Hi, my name's Jeff Morris. I live at 55 Elena. I think with this discussion, it's bringing up a lot of complicated points, and I think this whole inclusionary housing and fees requires a lot more study and understanding, because I see there's a lot of questions that I don't think people have answers to.
Mhm.
My recommendation would be to have Brittany and her staff complete the stuff in the HCD letter, get our housing element approved, and then take our time and focus on what this stuff really all means as it relates to objective design standards and all the stuff that we've spent months and months and months talking about, to what's in the best interest of the town. But I think we need to get the housing element approved by HCD so we don't risk builder's remedy. And I'd say slow down on the rest of the stuff.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come and give a public comment at this time? The floor is yours. Anybody online?
The online person.
Okay. Hello, if you're online, you have the floor.
Kelly
to
Martin.
State your name.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Kelly Martin, and I reside on Middlefield Avenue, adjoining the Ravenswood properties that have recently are being rezoned for multifamily. And I just wanted to, the council, several council members raised concerns about the idea of the waivers and concessions that could adversely impact or invalidate the design standards that you all and the public, very thoughtfully processed and crafted leading up to the rezoning decisions. So I just would urge the council to consider excluding the RM10 properties from inclusionary units if in fact we fear that that will render obsolete and invalidate all of that really thoughtful process for design standards, and just to make sure that the work that we've put in to make sure the new rezoning and development does not adversely impact neighbors in the neighborhoods. That's it.
Thank you, Kelly, for your comments. Okay, one more time. I'll close public comments and bring it back to council and to the commissioners. I really appreciate all the hard work that Brittany has done and your staff and the people from BAE, but I think that, and I think this was a very, very good discussion. It brings up a lot of questions. It makes some of the things that I've read more, it explains it. So I, for one, would like to table this and any decisions tonight and try to schedule another meeting or a work study, if that's okay with everyone.
I think you should let people comment on what we've just spent almost 2 hours.
Sure.
Going over.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Say,
So-
okay, I'm done
I
table
guess
it.
I guess I'd be asking, so in the recommendations you've made tonight, Brittany, I'm not sure no direction is the answer, but what is a most helpful direction right now overall that would get you, we don't have to know if you're going to Portland or Seattle. We just need to know what steps you take to go north.
At this point, my biggest concern is that we get an application on the RM10 sites and we don't have an inclusionary program, and so we don't get any affordable units out of it. That's driving my anxiety. But at the end of the day, the number of affordable units that would come from applying the inclusionary housing program to the RM10 sites is not going to satisfy the RENA program if sites on the schools don't develop.
I agree.
I think there's been some discussion about how such a program, because you have to have the program in order to then apply fees. The fees might be a way to help the more intensive multifamily programs on the school sites actually get going. So the sooner we do that, of course, the better. So my position as staff is, we can take our time, but we need to be mindful of how it might impact the town in meeting its objectives, which, are not too far away from having these mid-cycle check-ins that we're going to have to face and look at whether or not, the RM10 is even big enough, or what's going on with the RM20 and 40 sites. Are we going to have a shortfall, and what are we going to do then? So I don't want to be an alarmist, but that is my job.
To be an alarmist.
Okay, well, okay, let's go around the room and we'll start with Councilmember DeGoya, and everyone will have an opportunity to express
Well,
their feelings and
I mean,
comments.
I understand the pressure very much that we've been under from HCD. And notwithstanding that pressure, I think the only reason that we've approved the multifamily rezoned categories is to enable affordable housing. We clearly need affordable housing. Needing affordable housing at the schools is a no-brainer. We have more than 2,000 people that work at our schools, and none of them can live in Atherton. We know that. That's not new. We've thought from the very beginning that the most realistic way to enable affordable housing is from ADUs, and I think we need to stick to that agenda. And I'm not suggesting that anyone's suggesting a divergence from that. But we've also authorized these multi-family categories. While there are relatively few properties that they would apply to, I think we want to make sure that if they get built, they're going to include affordable housing. I don't want to see a multifamily site go up on one of these 1 acre properties that's all market rate housing. That seems completely destructive to who we are and what the character of Atherton is. If we have to have a multifamily site next to our currently single-family resident properties, there's got to be affordable housing in it. So it only makes sense to me that the only way you get there is you have an inclusionary ordinance, as I understand it. So I'm supportive of that. I think we need to be reasonable about it, and I think we need a big discussion about how it applies to single-family residents, because I do think the only way you're going to accumulate any real money in a fund is to have it apply to single-family residences. But I am not certain that I think everyone who builds a new single-family residence is going to build an ADU, because we give free square footage for it. There's a bunch of benefits that are associated with that. And that's part of our HCD program, a big part is to have those ADUs. So I don't think we're going to change from that. The big issue is, are people going to agree to deed restrict their ADUs, or will they agree to pay some dollar amount that is certainly going to be in excess of $100,000 if you look at the numbers in this report?
Right.
Are they going to agree to pay that rather than have a deed restricted ADU? I'm not sure that they're going to agree to do that, because what are they going to do with their ADUs? That most of them aren't going to rent them, but those that are probably mostly going to rent them to family and people that work for them, or people that they have a relationship to in the schools. And I think in almost every case, they're going to be rented at a number that would satisfy that deed restriction requirement. So while people don't want any restriction on their property, I understand that. If there's an inclusionary program that applies to them, I'm not confident that we're going to, see some large percentage of them pay the in lieu fee rather than the ADU. And I think all of this is a good discussion. So anyway, those are my
Okay.
comments.
Vice Mayor, your turn.
Well, Bill had.
No, we'll just go around.
We're
the
gonna-
table. Yeah.
Okay. So I think on the recommendation one of your questions is, should we distinguish between the RM 2040 and the 10s? And I think we should. I think there should be a discussion about that. I don't know that I have an opinion yet, but I think they are very different. I think if the schools are building multifamily housing and they do not have affordable housing, like what are we even, like there should be a fee for them, because if they're not building affordable, like, what are they up to here? Is my view. And for our arena, we need them to build a lot of affordable. So they better be paying big fees if they're not building affordable with their multifamily housing. And I think also single family homes, we should have a discussion about a fee there, because they need to build ADUs. So they need to build ADUs. I think whether or not they're deed restricted, I have a lot of questions about how that relates to, because a lot of the ADUs I think are going to be supporting multi-generational housing. So I'm wondering if, what happens if someone graduates from college, moves into an ADU, and they get promoted and they make more money? Like, how does that work, specifically? Because I think that those are questions, and that's how it's going to be used in Atherton. So I would love to have a discussion on that front. But I think either like build an ADU or pay us a lot of money so we can make sure our multifamily housing goes into the schools makes a lot of sense to me. So how's that for my beginning?
Councilmember Whitmer.
Yeah, I think the two biggest contributions to what we're trying to do here are the schools. And especially the college has a large number, and a substantial number of those are people or targeted for people that are in the lower rate for housing. And the only way we're going to get that things kickstarted is to raise some money. And I believe that we should. You're right, Rick is right. And yes, people, and I mentioned earlier too, a lot of people want to build an ADU because they get relief on the FAR. So I think we should make them deed restricted so that they will pay. Now, most of the new houses that are being built here are being built by developers, and the cost gets passed on to the guy who buys it, and it's not itemized that, oh, by the way, here's the in lieu fee that somebody's charging you. Okay. I don't agree with having the $438,000 as the in lieu fee. I think it should be something closer, to 200,000 or something like that, $250,000. That will, of course, keep Atherton the highest paid zip code in America. So that will contribute to that. But I think that we need to raise the money. And, the college is raising money at this point in time for scholarships. And so nothing's going to be done unless somebody steps in, and we could make the first step to at least get the design going, which then when HCD comes back next year and says, where are you? And is asking us to apply SB 10, which we asked to be taken out, but they want us to put back in, we're going to have some issues. So I do think that we need to do something. I think we need to do something rather quickly, and start collecting the money. That's my key thing. But I didn't agree with the 438 and change.
Okay.
With regards to where should it be applied, I think it should be applied to all of the, RM10 as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
fine, no problem. Thanks.
Commissioner Bryan.
I think that the performance that BAE did that are in the appendix are really good. And they convey a lot of information. One of the things one of the problems is that their assumption on square footage is net livable square footage. It's not the square footage definition that Atherton uses. And so when you plug in Atherton's definition into those performance, the townhouse, the townhouse economics aren't feasible.
Okay.
They're only feasible if they are including, if they're taking
Common
advantage of the
areas.
state density bonus.
Yeah.
That's the only way. And so what that means is that the in lieu of fee for the townhouses, we could do it, but it's a loss for anybody thinking to do a project like that. And so they won't be taken advantage of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Polito.
Well, I disagree with Rick. I don't very often, but these RM10 sites aren't included in the arena numbers. We're finding out that these density bonuses are going to produce a lot of unintended consequences. And while maybe the sites on Ravenswood are more suitable for those unintended consequences than the ones on Bay Road or on Oakwood, and they're still not what we signed up for. I don't think we should be at this point pushing to demand affordable housing on the RM10 sites. I think we should be trying to figure out how to generate fees and then how to spend the fees intelligently on multifamily projects in the right place, which right now, I don't think we've picked the ideal spots, and projects that the town can get built using third parties and that will move the needle significantly and let us maintain control and get a project or two done that doesn't embarrass anybody or destroy any of our residents' property values.
Okay, thank
So
you.
just to clarify, support for the
In-
inclusionary on single family only
In lieu of fees.
in lieu fees.
Commissioner Tonelli?
Sounds like we're pretty much mostly on the same page. First of all, thanks to Jeff for the comments. I do believe that we need to prioritize things a little bit and make sure that we're headed in the direction of getting things approved as far as the housing element is concerned. And then be able to discuss a lot of these other things where there's a lot more detail and nuances. So I think that is the general direction we should be heading in. I'm in favor of deed restrictions and generating fees. Also, in favor of the inclusionary housing requirements. I think those are necessary personally. And I say this all with a kind of a caveat, because I need to be more informed on a lot of these things as well. And as we get deeper into the weeds, my opinion could change. But from what I know right now, that's the direction I'm leaning in. I think we need to distinguish between the RM10s and the RM2040s. I think that is, in my opinion, kind of a no-brainer. The other thing that was kind of under the radar here that I haven't heard discussed that caught my attention was distinguishing between vacant lots and lots that have been built on. And I think those need to be held in the same regard. I think that if there's a distinguishing factor for that between those, and you get docked if it's vacant land, but you don't get docked if it's land that's built on, it could lead to, people coming in, taking down housing, and creating their own lot, and it just doesn't make sense to me to separate those two. I think those two should be lumped
Good
together.
point.
So on the surface, those are my initial thoughts on that.
Thank you.
I agree with Paul and everything he said. A couple of things that I was looking at is the most important thing for me is how do we make this happen the way we want it to come out and make the job easier for staff. So when I walk through these lists of distinguish between multifamily and multifamily rental, my answer is distinguish, yes. Pursue a 20% requirement. I need more insight into whether or not we pursue it or not, because I agree with Bob's view of it is like, they've got a way out if they want to use it. And I don't know that it helps us, but getting the plan approved is important. So if it came down to this would make us not get a final approval, then I'd say, let's do something with it. If it can be done later, then I would do it later. Pursue affordable requirement on I would say low income only is what I would say. You'd ask for which level, I'd say low. Because I think that's the only one we can effectively go for. And two, if we do a good job on that, we'll check off a box, at least one box. If we go for any others, we won't check off those boxes. Distinguish between RM 2040, very low, and RM 20. I need more understanding of that answer to answer that question. I would say, I don't know if it's relevant to us, but if it is relevant, then give me some more information on that. On recommendation 3, is the fee preferred alternative to on-site construction? And my answer would be no. I prefer to have the construction. Is there a preferred approach to application in lieu of fees? And I would say probably for sale units in lieu of as opposed to rental. But if there's more information on that, I listen to that. The basis for a fee, I'd say cost of construction. And then in the option of in lieu fee, approved ministerial, I would say at council level. And then the in lieu of fee process, RM20 or RM10s, I need more information. I'd say yes, but I want to get some more information on that.
Answering all his
And
questions. That's good.
Then on recommendation 4, I would say, I'm open for whatever the council would say on that, because I think all of them would work given the right scenario, but I have no preference on those. So that's
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Good job.
All right, thanks.
All right, Commissioner Levinson.
I'll be quick because I am very new at all of this, but I think, first to Paul's point, I mean, I had to laugh when they distinguished between empty lots. I mean, how many empty lots are there in Atherton? There are none. We all live here, we know. I mean, there are very few empty lots here. And I think, again, as Bill said, I would like to look at ways to raise funds to encourage schools to build there. I mean, we all live here. Nobody wants a multifamily unit next to them. I understand it may come to that, but if we could get schools to take the bulk of what we need, and obviously, schools, of course, they have to run the schools, and scholarships are a primary fundraiser for them. So in any way that we can help them raise money to build on school property, I think, that should be a primary goal. I would love to see that happen. And as far as ADUs, I mean, I know it still chips away, and I still think that it's something that we want to encourage. And, maybe there's another way we can incentivize deed restricted ADUs. So that, that can help us more with the state. It sort of terrifies me in the sense that I think that the state could come in and actually grant exceptions to things, and we would be back to losing some control.
Right.
Mm.
And I think that's terrifying. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you want to go
I want
again?
to add one more thing, which is I want to support.
We're
what
not going
Paul-
around again. No.
I want to support what Paul and others said about no distinction between vacant lots and
I agree with that.
new construction where somebody tears down a house. So we don't want to incentivize.
Right.
I mean, I think George's analysis is of about 28 or 29 new single-family residents a year. 8 are built on lots that weren't
Vacant.
built on before.
Oh.
So,
that-
but the others are all on lots where a ranch house has been torn down, and
Right,
we all
right.
see that going on. And we
Mid-century
don't want to
model.
make a distinction between those.
Right, and also that also applies to SB 9 lot splits, because once they're a lot split, then it's a vacant lot. Okay, so, we
Right.
need to,
Okay.
capture that.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. I think this has been a really good discussion. I can't add too much more to everything that's been said, except, we do still have some questions and that we need to flesh out. So are we going to table any more discussion on answering the questions that have been asked, or should we try to?
So I think staff can go back and create some summaries around this and.
Yeah, I just kind of want to give Stephanie and Asher an opportunity to jump in here if they heard anything that they need some clarification on before we regroup and move
Yeah,
on.
Because I actually have my answers.
And
written
I
up, but,
think from your comments earlier, from the very first question
Yeah.
about the timing around
but not
HCD,
like that.
it sounds like you guys are totally focused on moving as fast as we can to respond to HCD and get that back in, and that involves this
Oh,
special meeting. that you're gonna hold.
Absolutely. The planning commission is meeting 3 times in
You're
January.
getting your money's worth.
Oh,
So-
good. Yes,
Kudos to
yes.
them.
So we could, take the input that we've received this evening from everyone, and staff can move a inclusionary ordinance forward based on that to the planning commission, and it'll make its way to the council, or we can have another study session like this between the two bodies to talk about what we've developed.
I just still have questions about
Okay.
the unintended consequences
Okay.
of an inclusionary ordinance where we have no control over design standards and setbacks and height
Right,
and things
right.
like
We
that.
can filter in some more of the density.
Well,
bonus.
I'm
maybe-
getting,
Yeah.
a lot of conflicting information.
Maybe Mona could write something up for us to distribute it so that we could look at and see what her analysis is.
Well, we sent around that Myers-Nave
Yeah,
summary,
And I
who's a law
have it.
firm,
I do
Yeah.
too.
prepared on the density bonus. I believe that went to the commissioners as well as the council.
Okay.
And that outlines how waivers are processed, how concessions are done, and how reductions are done. And that table Yeah, I know you got it.
You didn't get it?
Yeah.
Let's
Oh, no, you
send
didn't.
it, send it around again
I'll
because
listen-
I
we will
think some
send
of
it
us
around
didn't
Yeah,
get it.
highlight the key thing for us, okay.
From Myers Nave.
Sandy
I mean,
Hook.
I've got a Myers Nave.
Yeah, it was
right
included in
here.
a council packet at one
Um,
point. I'll find that.
It was
No,
in- it was
no,
in
I
a
mean,
packet, last year.
Yes,
plan.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Myers
So we'll
Nave,
put something together
pulled it
based on
out
the feedback and then
how
come back
density
to another
bonuses work.
group session between the two
So,
bodies.
Oh,
but
no, just
they-
go to the planning commission.
But
If we're gonna stay on
I
track.
didn't get it. I pulled it out of the web, Myers Nave, how density bonuses work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I didn't get anything from you on it.
Oh, no, this was
Yeah,
last
so
year
it
and the
was
year
about a year
before.
This was a year ago. Oh,
Yeah.
It was over a year.
this-
I wasn't even alive then.
So I'm getting, just send it to the planning commission, or do you want to come back to this body with all the answers?
Well, we should vote
I-
on it then.
I think we all need to see it.
You all need to see it again?
But do you have enough to move ahead on something so you feel like you're making progress?
For the HCD resubmittal,
I think another joint study session would be good.
Yeah, and that's just on the
That's
inclusionary
not
stuff.
my-
The HCD stuff, we're
Yeah.
what
moving
I've been
ahead.
saying all
We
along.
will move forward with the housing element fixes as soon as possible. That's definitely going to the planning commission. They're all lined up for that. We won't we won't prioritize this above the housing element. Don't worry.
Okay.
Well,
But I think the next step for this, it would be helpful to have everybody come back together. Especially after having gone through the housing element, I appreciate having everybody in the same room,
Yeah.
hearing each other's
Mhm.
thoughts and making sure we're on the same
Thanks.
page. before
but since
put
we,
something forward.
Thank you.
since
Yes.
we have we mentioned an inclusionary ordinance in our housing element, and I believe that they asked for some detail on it. What are we gonna say?
They did not ask for additional detail on that as part of their comments. What they're looking for is us to
Read the
put
letter. I
that
didn't see that.
multifamily housing is approved ministerially. And the
Oh.
way that it's written right now says it's permitted by right.
Right,
So
okay.
I have to make that.
So we
distinction.
just leave in there that we're having an inclusionary housing element
We're not going to
TBD.
touch any of the inclusionary housing language.
Oh, it's already in
and
there.
Updating the housing element package.
But I would say there was something you pointed out, which is the housing element says that the inclusionary ordinance would apply to new construction and additions.
Mhm.
Right,
And we
We're
haven't
not
talked
doing
about
about
additions at all. So
yeah.
I
I
would
think
take that out.
Yeah, take additions
They
out.
don't have to. I mean, if we, let's say that the state certified our housing element and we move forward with an inclusionary housing policy that didn't address additions, that's okay.
Or we could.
We
address
don't
it.
have to go back and
Okay,
change.
Right?
Okay,
That would be
all
a
right.
flag. It could make it like, well, so where's your inclusionary policy?
good point.
All right, but also in the final outcome, we could say, additions aren't necessary. I mean, we could use verbiage in the inclusionary plan that would just
And
say-
absolutely, because when you
that
adopt the
ended.
inclusionary ordinance, you're
Right.
gonna have to, or when you recommend it,
Right.
you have to address findings of general plan consistency, which
Right.
means consistency with the housing element. So as part of that decision-making process, I would write up something to say, they considered it, but they chose not to because they found that it was not defensible.
Right.
Or
Not
they
necessary.
wanted to focus more on capturing full development rather than
Okay.
partial.
There's a number of
development.
policies and
Yeah.
programs that
we
are,
can deal with
that are, the verbiage is,
It's this
after
letter right
analysis, we'll consider X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
So that's where they're coming back.
Good, that would work for me. Yeah, I
Right.
don't want to red flag the fact that we.
All right.
No, okay. Any other comments?
Motion to adjourn.
Ready? Any motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, I did- I didn't-
We'll
okay.
do- We'll do
The
this.
same- okay.
Do we have to vote second?
No. Meeting's adjourned.